Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be a wrap-up of some of the recent and not-so-recent fiction that I have consumed. So first up is a book that I actually read quite a while ago, and that is Petina Grappah's An Elegy for Easterly. This is a very depressing short story involving a mentally ill woman who is pregnant by rape, and a very religious woman who would like to have a child, and a village that is about to be bulldozed to make things look prettier for when the Queen visits Zimbabwe. This was more memorable than I expected it to be. When I first read it, I thought that is not going to be memorable, but it has been quite a while since I've read it, and now talking about it, I find that I do remember virtually the whole thing. So I may have to up my star rating on this one. This is also available, in addition to on its own, in a larger collection, which I think maybe changed the tone of it from what I've read. People do say that in comparison and contrast to the stories around it, it has kind of a different resonance to it, but on its own, it holds up. Because it's so short, there's not that much I can say. Next up, I have a piece of franchise fiction. This is Dragon Age Blue Wraith by Nunzio DeFilippis, Christina Weir, and Fernando Heinz Furukawa. This is the same team that's done the rest of this run of Dragon Age tie-ins, which involve an elf rogue and a human knight who are off having adventures. And in each volume they run into some characters from the game. In this particular one, the character they encounter is Fenris from Dragon Age 2. I think in some ways, whether the characterization of Fenris works for you will depend on the choices that you made playing Dragon Age 2. If you've never played Dragon Age 2, I don't know why you'd be reading this book. But, although, I mean, I think they're decent enough fantasy stories on their own, but I think the fun is the character cameos. So, I don't know. Does anybody read franchise books without engaging with the original media? I can't imagine. I guess people do that with the Dragonlance books, maybe. But outside of that, does anyone? I wonder. The next thing that I read was a collection of short stories, but it feels more like a novella. That is Ismail Kadare's Elegy for Kosovo. I forgot to write down the translator's name, but it's not the usual translator that I've seen on his books. So I was curious to read this just because I wondered how much the voice would change. And I did feel like a lot of the same humor came through with his translator as the one that I've read before. I'll note everybody in the description below. All three of the stories in this look at the Battle of Kosovo from the 14th century when the Ottoman army came in and took over the kingdoms of Albania, Bosnia, and I forget what Serbia was called in those days, but all of the Balkan kingdoms fell to the Ottoman army at that point. The first of these stories is specifically about the battle, and it is fairly straightforward. There are a few kind of winks to the camera, almost, that I appreciated and that felt very classically like the author. But it was surprisingly straightforward. It was a very, here's what happened. The second story, which is very much more in character, I guess, or much more what I expected, is about a group of musicians who flee north, and they presumably end up in somewhere in Austria, and an aristocrat brings them in and asks them to perform. And they're performing, and a lot of their music is kind of aggressive towards each other in an ethno-nationalistic kind of way. And this aristocrat is asking them, like, what are you doing? You've just been defeated. This doesn't seem like the time to be at each other. And, I mean, obviously there's a lot of 20th century and 21st century commentary in this, even though it's a 14th century story. So that had a lot of the gallows humor to it that I thought was entertaining, but I would have liked to have seen something a little longer with that one, to be honest. But the final story in this was just a masterwork. If the final story had been the only story, this would have been an absolute 5-star favorite book of the year kind of thing for me. And it is told from the perspective of essentially the ghost or the spirit of Murad I, and he's kind of reflecting on the history going forward, going up until the more recent issues in Kosovo. It was just a fantastic look at the kind of rolling tides of history and thinking about, has the earth been cursed, or are people bringing this on themselves, or is it a bit of everything? And I thought that part was just fantastic. If you are super nationalistic, you might not love some of this. I definitely saw some really good reads. Some of them were definitely from people who had not actually read the book and were just pre-offended on a nationalistic basis. As with everything Balkan, you're not going to make everybody happy, but yeah, the final story in this I thought was just fantastic. Next up, I read the final volume of the Maritime Noir series Tramp, which I talked about it a lot in March, so I'm not going to get into it now because actually I'm not even sure if it's the final volume. It was volume 9. There might be more. It's the final story in the Vietnam series. In this, the first story involved the main character. Crimes happening on a boat going to Colombia. This is crimes happening not on a boat, but in Vietnam in the 50s. And the main character is a French guy, and he meets his father's second wife and his half-brother in this, and crime ensues. I would say this is definitely not a book that is for everyone. It is very graphic with the violence, and it does have a very kind of end of colonialist story, and while I do think there is critique of it, it is very implicit critique, so people who are looking for an explicit critique of these things are going to be unhappy with this. But if you do like a maritime noir story, this is a decent series. Just be aware that it's upfront about the setting. And additionally, I read something that the more I reflect on it, the more I think it's not actually that good, but as I was reading it, it was super compelling. And that was volumes 1 and 2 of Something is Killing the Children by James Tynion IV and Werther Dell'Edera, who have done a number of books together. This is kind of a supernatural thriller in which a monster in the woods is killing children and a mysterious woman comes to town to help them fight the monster. It was so compelling. I was reading this through Hoopla. I read the first one with the idea that I'd see how it was, and I immediately took the second one out of the library, and there isn't a third volume yet, but the issues are on Hoopla, so I took the next issue that had come out of it, and I was ready to take the issue out of that because it goes up to 12, but it's only collected up to 10. I had used up all of my Hoopla borrows, and I was frustrated that I couldn't read the next issue even though it was sitting there. So that's how compelling this was. I did feel like I needed to read the whole thing at once. But as I think about it, there were some flaws in the story. Now, does that matter in what is, a horror action book? Probably not. I think it worked because as I was reading it, I found it really compelling. That I have some issues with, it's very convenient that this one character acts suspiciously at a point that will make this other character behave in a way later. Is that perfect storytelling? No. Did it take away from my enjoyment? Not really. So I would call this successful at what it's doing, and what it's doing is not high art, but it doesn't need to be because it's just a fun, exciting, compelling story. So yeah, I was very happy with that one. Alright, as always, if you've read any of these, I'd love to hear what you think. Yeah, that's it for now. Ciao.